So thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming out, and I'm so pleased to be here. I want to thank Portland State University, and I want to thank the War Prevention Initiative and the Rotary Action Group for Peace and the Jubitz Family Foundation. It's a great honor for me to be here, and I'm always, I don't know if I can use the word happy, but I'm glad when people want to hear about our conflict, what it's like to be there, and to think about ways that each one of us maybe can do something to make a change. Today I'm going to be talking about the question of personal narratives, personal stories of experiences connected to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'm going to be looking at when do these narratives encourage peace building, but when do they do the opposite, unfortunately, and when do they actually encourage war? So what I'm going to present are different ideas about what are narratives, what is dialogue. I'm going to present a conceptualization that I came up with over the last year, and then I'm going to give you some examples of what it looks like, and we'll end with some questions. I'm hoping that there will be questions from you, but I'm also giving you questions that I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. So I want to start with something that's a little bit dark. It's a song. It's a song by an Israeli singer, songwriter, musician. He's quite well known in Israel. His name is Yizhar Ashdod. And it's a song, it combines his personal story with Israel's story about the occupation, about the effects that the occupation have had on mostly young, well, it's many Israelis, but you'll see in the song clip that it's about Israeli soldiers who serve in the occupation. And so we have here an intertwining of his story and Israel's story, and it begins a little dark, but I hope that by the end of the talk and by the end of the morning, we have some better ideas about what we can do to move out of that darkness into something that gives us not only more hope, but something we can actually do.
ללמוד להרוג זה עניין של תנופה, מתחיל בקטן ואחר כך זה בא. מפטרל כל הלילה בקספה של שכם, היי מה כאן שלנו ומה שלכם. תחילה רק תרגיל, כת הולמת בדלת, ילדים עמומים, משפחה מבוהלת. אחר כך הסגר, זו כבר סכנה, המוות עורב מאחורי כל פינה. דורכת הנשק, הזרוע רועדת, אצבע נוקשה, צמודה אל ההדק. הלב מתפרע, פועם מבוהל, הוא יודע, להבא זה יהיה יותר קל. הם לא איש, לא אישה, הם רק חפץ, רק צל. ללמוד להרוג, זה עניין של הרגל. ללמוד לפחד, זה עניין של תנופה. מתחילים בקטן, ואחר כך זה בא. הבשורות מלמעלה, יורדות לרחוב. אין סיכוי לחיות הלאה, הסוף כה קרוב. נבואות האימה כקרקוע עורבים, תגיפו תריסים, הסתגרו בבתים. אנחנו רק קומץ והם כה רבים, מדינה קטנטנה אכולת אויבים. בליבם רק שנאה, יצרה ואפל, ללמוד לפחד זה עניין של הרגל. ללמוד אכזריות זה עניין של תנופה, זה מתחיל בקטן ואחר כך זה בא. כל ילד הוא גבר, תאב ניצחונות, ידיים לעורף, רגליים פסוקות. זה זמן סכנה, זה זמן חבלה, חייל תתחשל, סגולה לחמלה. הבן דוד כמו חיה כבר גיל לראות דם, אינו חש בסבל, אינו בן אדם. מדי בית ושפשפת, שישות ושגרה, מטמטום עד הרוע, הדרך קצרה. רק לנו, אדמת ישראל, ללמוד אכזריות, זה עניין של הרגל. ילד, ילד, תעצור, ילד, ילד, בוא תחזור. בוא אליי, מחמא ליבי, בוא אליי, תינוק שלי, קוקודרים הם השמיים, ובחוץ כבר על אתר, חיילי הבדין עדיין מתחת למיטה. בוא הביתה ילד, בוא הביתה. ללמוד לאהוב זה עניין של רכות, בצעד זהיר בענן עדינות. מהסס נתמוסס נתרכך נתעגל, ללמוד לאהוב זה עניין של הרגל. להיות בן אדם זה עניין של תנופה, זה עובד כמו עובר ואחר כך זה בא. להיות לדקה רק עכשיו רק היום בצידו השני של אותו המחסום. אך ליבנו כבר גס והאור כואבר, חרשים ועיוורים בבועת העובר. בפליאה נתבונן במלאך הנופל, להיות בן אדם זה עניין של הרגל. זה עניין של הרגל.
Okay. Probably woke up some people, that song. The song is called It's a Matter of Habit, and just also it's important for me to say that Yizhar Ashdod is a very famous Israeli singer, and the song came out 2 years ago, and they played it on the radio for maybe 2 days, and then it was banned, and they took it off the radio. So it's a song that you can get on YouTube, but they stopped playing it on Israeli radio. Okay, so now we're going to move into the world of narratives, personal narratives. To begin with, there's a very interesting fact that actually since the 1940s, pretty much since the end of World War II, throughout the world there have been hundreds of thousands of personal narratives of what we'll call massive social trauma, war, genocides, forced relocation, refugees that have been collected throughout the world. They've been collected for political purposes, historical and social science research, education, and peace building and reconciliation. So it really is a worldwide phenomenon, and so we can ask, why are people in the world so interested in hearing people's stories? So we know that it is inherently natural to tell your story. That's what we do. Humans in every culture tell stories. So narratives or stories include an unfolding of events, what happened over time, characters, who was involved, description. Stories always have a moral, you know, at the end of the story. And so why am I telling you this story? Because it's important for me that you understand X, Y, and Z. So we have an explanation of how each person sees what happened, the reasons it happened. And they provide valuable insight into personal lives, values, and beliefs. But we also know that nobody lives in a vacuum. So through personal stories, we can also learn societal and cultural values and beliefs. And so we actually get these two layers, which are very, very important. Personal narratives are influenced by two larger societal and cultural phenomena. One is called collective narratives. Collective narratives are the narration and the representation, or the construction of the past adopted by society. So therefore, it's a social product. Where do we find these collective narratives? We find them in history books. We find them in educational programs. We find them in movies. So these are we have the personal stories, but they're also embedded in the wider societal stories. And we also have what are called master narratives. And master narratives are the narratives, are the stories that drive the political agendas of the time. So we can think of them as society's dominant discourse. How is society talking about a certain topic or issue or events? I'm a psychologist, I'm a social psychologist, and for many years we were taught that it's good to tell your story. It's good when you've undergone trauma, when you've undergone something horrendous, that it's good that you can tell your story. But I say, well, is it? So there are pros and cons, as there are to everything in life. So the pros is that when a person tells his or her personal story of great trauma that they suffered, especially at the hands of others, it can bring relief. It can bring a sense of healing that I'm talking and people are listening. And so I'm feeling some sense of relief that I'm able to talk about it. I'm able to voice it. So it does give voice to the silenced traumas. We have a number of traumas that you don't talk about. And so when you can talk about it, it does bring people some relief. It can also restore a sense of justice, because people may feel that if there's people listening, then they'll hear the injustices done to me, and then maybe they'll do something to work against those injustices. So it can have that effect as well. It gives meaning to life, because when people undergo traumatic experiences, they need to fit it into their life somewhere. What meaning does it have? Why is it important to my life? What am I supposed to do from here out? So it can also give people meaning and purpose in life, which is very important, always, but especially after trauma. And it can build a sense of identity and sense of self, because we know that victims of trauma, and again, massive social trauma, often feel that their personhood has been erased or almost erased. So this helps them build, again, a sense of self, a sense of coherence, a sense of identity. However, there are also cons to telling your own story. And one is what we call the monologues of victimhood, because when you've been a victim of trauma, oftentimes people get caught in how they're a victim. And so they tell their story always about I as the victim. And we can see how somebody who is always talking about I as a victim, how that would not be very healing or bring much relief. It would just get the person more into the feeling that they have been victimized. It can also bring re-traumatization. Because on the one hand, we say, well, if you don't talk, that's not good. But sometimes if you talk too much, you're reliving the event. And so you're constantly back in that attempt at genocide. You're back at that war. You're back at being forced to relocate. And we have what one of the Holocaust scholars, Lawrence Langer, talked of anguished or unheroic memories, where he found that a lot of Holocaust survivors, when they talked, their memories were just so full of anguish and so unheroic. And so when the people talked, they just felt much worse after they had talked. But we can also ask, okay, is the sharing of trauma narratives, is it good or bad for society? Let's not just talk about the person. So the pros, again, show that this way we have firsthand accounts from people who lived it. It's very important. We have primary sources, people who could tell us what it was like to live during that war, during that genocide. It can also make the past relevant for younger people. People who are 20, 30 today, and they listen to their elders talk about what happened to them in the Holocaust or what happened to them during the 1948 war with what ended with the statehood of Israel. So it becomes relevant. You know, what was my grandma doing? What was my grandpa doing? And they can make sense of it. And another idea is moral witnessing. Moral witnessing means that if people listen, then they can also then carry on the torch, and they can say, okay, this happened to my grandfather, this happened to my father, now we're going to make things different. I'm going to be a moral witness for them, and we're going to do something else. But there are, of course, many cons as well. The first one I'll say is called the chosen or the hot trauma. This is a term used by Volkan. Chosen trauma is, what this means is groups in society, ethnicities, nationalities, have in their past events or an event that is so traumatic that is every time when they think about themselves in the world or their people in the world, they think about that trauma. They can't let it go. It's part of, I'll even say it's part of their DNA. So for the Jews, it's the Holocaust. Okay, so even Jews who are 20 years old, 15 years old, if you say the word Holocaust, tears will come to their eyes because it's something that, it's like pushing a button. And so it becomes it's a chosen trauma. And that's how you understand yourself and the world around you. And they can become very hot and very acute. For instance, when we're at war with Palestinians, so then people immediately go to, oh, it's like in the Holocaust when they tried to kill us. So for the Palestinians, the chosen trauma is Nakba. It's the 1948 catastrophe when the Palestinians lost their homeland and lost their nationhood, and most of them became refugees. So in the Israeli case, we have the Holocaust and Nakba. We also have what's called memory prisons, in that the society gets locked into these prisons of memories of these tragedies, and then we can ask, well, do people have to be locked into these memories? Is it my responsibility to be locked into this prison? And people they're as if they're always in this prison of these awful memories, and so society itself is locked up. And it can, of course, lead to renewed revenge or violence. Because we were traumatized, and because we were harmed, and this is what we need to do. So that was very briefly about narratives. But now I want to tie narratives into dialogue. Because when we're talking about narratives, we're talking about, what I'm talking about here is, one person talking to maybe an interviewer or maybe to other people about his or her experiences. But many of these narratives also take place in dialogue. So it's important to understand, at least the way that I relate to dialogue. So dialogue is relationship building, and there have to be at least two people. Okay? So that's a given. And dialogue is often, or monologue is often confused with dialogue, where it's pseudo-communication. It looks like two people are in a relationship, but actually they're talking at one another. They're talking near one another. They're not really talking with one another. So what we have is a lot of monologue, often, which is camouflaged or masquerades as dialogue, but it's actually monologue. In order for there to be true dialogue, we have to understand a number of things. To begin with, it's a joint venture. Okay? If I'm in dialogue with somebody, I can be the best dialogist in the world, but if I'm not connecting to the person, I'm still in monologue. So it's a joint venture, which means that if it fails or if it succeeds, it's due to the two of us. At least I'm going to use two people. So dialogue we really have to think of as something as a joint work, a joint endeavor, and whether it is accomplished or whether it fails, it really depends on the two people who are involved. It's very scary because it's dynamic and unpredictable. We may know where it begins. We can never actually know where it ends. It's a long-term process. So it takes some courage, actually, to go into real dialogue. I always like to use Martin Buber, the great philosopher, and he talked about an I-thou relationship. He actually said that dialogue creates community, dialogue creates humanity. And what is an I-thou dialogue? It's a dialogue where when two people are in communication, are in dialogue with one another, it's a meeting, it's a true meeting of the two people, and they are creating. What they create between them is this sense of community. And that's different. That is different than an I-it, what we think is dialogue, where I am speaking to someone, but as that person is an object or a tool, something there's a reason why I'm speaking to him or her. There are very few I-thou moments, actually, in human interaction. Dialogue builds community and can sustain community. It's a very reflective process. And if it is done well and often and with commitment, it can lead to new shared understandings. Okay, so I talked about narrative and I talked about dialogue, and now I want to kind of put these things together to show you a conceptualization that I came up with over the last year of how they work, and then to look at, okay, what kinds of personal narratives can either lead to peace building or encourage some kind of peace building, and what kind of personal narratives may actually encourage war, may do the opposite. So this isn't, I have to say, this is a conceptualization. It's not, I'm not giving you results of research. I'm bringing you, over the years, over 25 years, I've collected and been in many, I have many narratives, been in many dialogue groups. And so things, patterns that I see that have evolved. So if we look at the continuum, it goes from call for vengeance over to embracing the other. So I'll just give you the idea of what each one is. A call for vengeance means that, why am I telling you this story? Because I want revenge. All right? I want to hurt the other, the people that hurt me. And so that's the moral of my story, and that is my understanding. So that's on one end. After that, we have what I'm calling victimhood, where there's a story, a personal narrative, and it's, I was victimized, and this is how I was hurt, and this is how I was harmed, and to this day I remain a victim. If we move over, we have confusion. Confusion is when people move back and forth between, I was a victim, but I want to see things differently. I was harmed, but I want to do some kind of peace work with my enemy. So people move back and forth, and so that's why I've called that confusion. And the last one is actually called embracing the other. It's missing a few words, while remaining in my pain. The person does not give up their pain. They do not say, no, it didn't happen. But they, even though, in spite of the fact that they are feeling so much pain from what they suffered, they do embrace the other. Now, it can move from one to the other. I can say, I'm shortly going to give you some examples. Happily, there isn't a lot of call for vengeance, and you'll understand why when I show you the example. We hear a lot of victimhood, confusion, and we don't hear a lot of embracing the other. You don't have to start at one end and move to the other. You could be in victimhood, move to confusion, move back to victimhood, or maybe you start from confusion and go to embracing the other, but it gives you an idea. Now, under call for vengeance and victimhood, these are two kinds of narratives that tend to obstruct peace building, especially when they're in monologues. What does that mean? If an interviewer is talking to one person and he's talking about a call for vengeance, it doesn't do much to get peace moving forward. Victimhood, though, sometimes can encourage peace building and join confusion and embracing the other. So it can encourage peace building, especially when it's done in dialogue groups, and if you remember the kind of dialogue I'm talking about. But there are conditions. First, there has to be a desire to listen, to learn, and to gain new understandings. And the most basic, the hardest thing to do in narrative work is listening to someone's story. It's to listen. Okay? You don't have to ask any great questions. But to listen and to contain is very difficult. So there needs to be a desire that I'm going to listen, and I want to learn, and I want to hear. There has to be a safe space for communication. That means in the group itself, there has to be facilitation that is very containing, that is very welcoming, that does not shut up people, and people have to be willing to take part in that. It has to be a reflective process, so it isn't just speaking. It's thinking about it, it's talking about it, it's reflecting again. And so that means it needs to be ongoing. It's not a one-time deal. It's not, I'll come to this dialogue group, I'll hear their story, I'll move on. It has to be something where we're meeting and meeting again and meeting again. But there are also some other societal conditions. Under call for vengeance and victimhood, you can see that if it's an ongoing violent conflict, it's very hard to move towards any peace building because the outside doesn't allow it. if there are more dichotomous master narratives, we're right, they're wrong. We're pure, they're evil. And if the chosen trauma is hot, okay, if it's something that is readily reignited. On the other hand, if there is a lull in violence, or if we're in some kind of negotiation stage, it's easier to make those narratives into dialogue. Also, or if there's less dichotomous master narratives, if the master narratives are beginning to disappear, and people are saying, well, maybe it didn't exactly happen that way, maybe they had a point. And the chosen trauma is not acute. Okay, so that's the general idea. And right now it's very theoretical, and now we're going to get down to people's words. Okay? So some personal narratives, and I'm, of course, in this talk, focusing on the Israeli-Palestinian case. The song, I think, was difficult. Many of these are difficult quotes. Yeah, I just want you to know that they're not easy quotes. So we're going to start with Yona, who's a Holocaust survivor from Hungary that I interviewed in 2003 for a joint Israeli-Palestinian project on refugees. And we were looking at Jewish Israelis who had been refugees from the Holocaust or Northern Africa, and the Palestinians were looking at people who were still refugees, Palestinian refugees. And at the end of each, and we asked for their life stories, and these were we videotaped these. I was at his home. And at the end, I would always ask, are you interested in meeting, are you interested in joining a group of Israelis and Palestinians and talking together? Anyway, so at the end of his talk, he told me about what happened to him. And he wasn't sent to Auschwitz. His family was. He was 14, lost his whole family. And this is what he says. I would put all of the Palestinians on transports and send them to the gas chambers just like the Nazis did with us. And I know Palestinians. I have worked with them, and I've had Palestinian friends. But this is what I think. So I have labeled this a call for vengeance. This is why he's telling me a story. Because now it's very interesting. When he talked about, he didn't say we should have put the Nazis in gas chambers like they did us, or we should kill all the young Germans. That's not what he said. He used it for the Palestinians. And he said, no, I have no interest in meeting Palestinians. And I have to say also that when he said that, I didn't hear this. This was very interesting. I somehow did not hear this when I interviewed him. When I went back to the university and I was going through the tapes and I wanted to look and see what, kind of quality control and what had happened, all of a sudden I see this. And I literally jumped out of my seat. And I thought, how did I miss this? And I went back, and it was obviously so troubling to me that I wiped it out. But that was Yona's message, and we don't see any relief. We don't see any healing. We don't see any dialogue. The next one comes from a man that I've called Ahmad. Ahmad was, Ahmad was about 26. This is pretty recent. This was from not even a year ago. He's a young man from Gaza, and we participated in a joint Palestinian-Israeli-German dialogue group in Germany. And I knew Ahmad. I had met him from once before, and I asked him if he would like to join this seminar group, and he said he wanted to come. And so this is what Ahmad said. During the war, he's talking about the first Gaza war in 2008, I was a translator for foreign journalists who came to Gaza. I was only 22 and never had such a job before. I met with them in places being bombed, and there were so many. There were air raids all the time and everywhere. My house shook constantly from the bombs, and windows shattered. I also accompanied them to the hospital where the wounded were taken. And then he began crying, and he was silent for about 15 seconds. I saw terrible things, body pieces, people without limbs, so much blood. I had never seen anything like that before. I had to remain professional and interview the wounded and their parents and the doctors because the journalists were counting on me to explain what was going on. I felt sick but had to go on. I had to help them so that they could let the world know what was happening in Gaza. I still see those sights, can't get them out of my head. The Israelis tried to destroy us, and there was nowhere to run or hide. I was only 22 and I wasn't prepared for such sights. When Ahmad told this story in the group, the meeting, we met for about 4 days, and he didn't talk the whole time. He didn't speak. I mean, he spoke after the sessions, but he never spoke in the sessions. And then the facilitator came up to him and said, we really want to hear your voice. We really want to hear what your life is like. And so when he told the story, he told it, but he didn't look at anybody, except for when he looked at me, because I live on the other side of the Gaza Strip. So he every now and then would look at me, but usually he was with his head down and crying. And that's how he told his story. The story is complete victimhood. There are no good Israelis. There's no compassion here. It's very visceral. And he's also saying, I was 22. I was just a kid. What did I know? And I had to do it because it was my responsibility to let the world know what was going on. Now, it is interesting that Ahmad, there was a second part of the seminar a few months later, and he came. And I asked him after that part, would you come again? And he said, yes, I would come again. His story didn't change. It's victimhood. But he keeps on coming. So that's why I say, okay, here's the hope. He keeps coming. And he stays in the room, and he listens to our stories as well. The next comes from a man that I've called Imad. These are all pseudonyms. They're not their real names. And Imad he's in his 40s, and he's from East Jerusalem. And I don't have the time to go into all the, it's very complex. The Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, what is their identity, nationality, it's very, very complex. But it's important to know in general that Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, because Jerusalem now is, of course, since the '67 war, under Israeli control and part of the capital of Israel, is that if a Palestinian leaves her home from Jerusalem and is gone for a few years, they lose their residency. They can't come back. So it's a big issue of people being afraid to leave because then they can't come back, and maybe families have lived there for hundreds of years. So this Imad is what I called confusion. And this was also in a joint Palestinian, German, Israeli group, and he was telling his story. I saw them shoot my neighbor. He didn't do anything. He wasn't a terrorist. He was a businessman. The Israeli soldiers yelled at him to stop walking, and he reached for something in his pocket. He was trying to get his handkerchief to wave. They thought it might be a gun. He died in the street, and they wouldn't let us go get him or send for an ambulance. They killed him because they were scared and saw every one of us as the enemy. They also killed one of my students, an honor student, planning to go to college. Imad is a high school teacher. They shot him because he was throwing stones. I know that they shouldn't throw stones, and I've told them it's wrong, but what can you do? They see the army day and night, and they see the settlers moving into the neighborhood and claiming it for themselves. And they're just kids. They shot him in the head. Why didn't they aim for his leg? They just want to kill. And then he continued later on. But I know that there are other Israelis like you here. I feel that Yitzhak is my brother. He's sitting next to a man called Yitzhak, and he puts his hand on Yitzhak's shoulder, an Israeli. I know that he loves me and would do anything to protect me if he saw that I was in danger, and Yitzhak was crying. I know that there are good Israelis who hate the occupation and stand with us, but there aren't enough. I want to believe that there are more, but it's hard when every day all you see is army and settlers. Damn the occupation. And he threw down his notebook and he stormed out of the room. And then 10 minutes later, he came back to the room. And he apologized for storming out of the room, and he said, because he was on the verge of tears and he didn't want to cry in front of us, so he went to the bathroom, he relaxed, he washed his face, calmed down, and he came back. So why is this confusion? Because you can see the confusion. It's back and forth. They shot my neighbor. He's just a businessman. They shot an honor student. They just want to kill. We're just the enemy. But then he says, but then I know that there are other Israelis. And I know, like you in the room. And he puts his hand on his neighbor, and they're both crying. So it's back and forth. And I can say that Imad also, his behavior was back and forth because he was in the organization. And then he would quit the organization. And then 6 months later, he would come back to the organization. So it was like he also, it wasn't only his words, it was his actions. I'm in, I'm out. And then he left the organization again. But then on our email list, he kept writing us emails. So he's caught. He's caught in this, this web. So the last example I want to bring you is from a woman that I've called Hadar. And Hadar was in her 30s, about 32. And she lives in the region that I live in. She lived in Sderot, which is the town right across from the Gaza Strip. It's less than 2 kilometers across from the Gaza Strip. And Hadar participated in a seminar, a weekend seminar that I organized also with a group that I work with called Other Voice. And we brought Gazans from the Gaza Strip and Israelis. They were young adults, college students or afterwards. And we met over a weekend. And we did this 3 times. And each one was telling their story. And Hadar told her story of when it came her turn. The day that broke me was in 2008, when there were days on end with 50, 60, and 70 rockets fired from Gaza onto Sderot. The Tseva Adom means red alert. That's the siren we get when rockets are coming over. Went off time after time after time. I was at home because I was terrified to leave the house and go to work. I made my boyfriend stay home as well. I didn't want to be caught outside when the rockets fell. Our apartment had no safe room. I crawled into the kitchen and lay down on the floor in a fetal position next to the refrigerator, like a baby in his mother's womb. I was shaking and crying, afraid to stand up. I said to my boyfriend, I can't take this anymore. And then when she finished, a Palestinian in the seminar from Gaza asked her, so why did you come to the seminar? And she said, because I believe in peace and believe that so do most Gazans. Extremists on both sides terrorize us, not the ordinary people. Even as I was lying on that floor and sobbing, I knew that there were people on your side doing the same. I can't live like this, and I know that you can't either. We're all humans and deserve the same rights. You should be able to live without fear and walls and restrictions, and I should be able to live in peace in my hometown. I want to go back to Sderot, and I want you to be free. So this I've called embracing the other, but enmeshed in her pain. She doesn't give up on her pain. She doesn't try to say it doesn't matter or I don't remember. She gives a blow-by-blow description of the day that broke her. Crawling into the kitchen, lying down by the refrigerator, terrified to get up, and that she has to eventually leave her hometown. She became a refugee. She had to leave her town and move, so she moved somewhere in the general area, but that was outside of rocket range. But why is she here? Because we don't deserve this. I don't deserve this. You don't deserve this. And as I'm lying on that floor, I'm thinking of you as well. So I'm crying for both of us. So I found this to be a good example of how you can remain in your pain, but you do embrace the other. And then that, of course, is something that makes peace building a possibility. They did eventually move back to Sderot a few years ago. So to conclude, I have a few questions, actually, that I'm putting out to you. And the question is, to ask or not to ask for personal narratives. Because if we take, for instance, Yona's narrative of a call for vengeance, I don't know, maybe we're not going to go elicit that kind of narrative. Maybe it's better that we don't hear that kind. So I have some questions. There could be more. But one, for instance, is what are the main purposes for eliciting the narratives? Why are we doing it? Is this something that we can't get somewhere else? What do we want to use it for? Do we want to use it for propaganda? Do we want to use it for peace building? Do we want to use it to educate? So I think we need to decide, because even though there are hundreds of thousands of personal narratives, I have to tell you that most of them have never seen the light of day. They're handwritten. They're on videotapes, if you remember those. They're on discs, CDs. They're on library shelves. They're locked up into cabinets. But we collect these stories, but we rarely do things with them. Will they be shared? And if so, with whom, when, and how? Okay, how are we going to use them? And how are we going to let the people know that we're planning on using them? Another question is, what can we do to change narratives of vengeance and victimhood into types that could encourage peace work? Okay, and even if I take the one of vengeance, how do we get the person into the room? How do we get Yona to come into the room? We don't want to change his story, but how do we get him to say, okay, I will come and I will be there? I don't yet know how, so I'm really happy to hear if people have ideas how to do that. And a final question I pose is, where do narratives from one side connect to narratives from the enemy? Because there's always connection. What are the places or stories that share common ground, and how can we encourage to look for them and understand them? Because as everything in life, if we look for where we share something, if we look for, yes, we can agree on that. We don't agree on 98%, but on that 2%, we can agree. So let's look for those places, because if we build on those places, then we can start expanding. So thank you.